Thank you, Irene, and Mark, for coming. Why don't I start off with a question for you, Irene? We just had some very interesting comments from Li Junfeng from the Chinese government this morning about how much faster they are now expanding in solar panels in China than in wind. Norway, of course, is a powerhouse in offshore wind. But just recently, you've been investing in a big solar project in Brazil. Is even Norway, with its wind tradition, now starting to look more towards solar?
Well, I think it was talked about within the car fleet earlier in the previous session. It's all about diversification. You cannot rely on one technology. I think you'll see several technologies, not only solar and wind, but there will be gas in the mix going forward. There will be hydrogen eventually, and one is going to do really well in some places and one is going to do well in other places, but eventually you will need combinations. We had the first non-subsidized solar park being built in the UK, which is kind of sensational, but come the winter time it's dark half of the day even, so you need other solutions, and wind is a very good and attractive backup in northern hemisphere and when there's a lot of wind.
Okay, thank you.
And we are seeing costs coming down on offshore wind and wind as well, significantly.
Okay, thank you.
Hope to go back to that.
Well, let's come back to that one. Mark, staying on the solar, many of you may know First Solar is the largest American solar panel company. We had Mr. Lee talking this morning about how, in his view, China has been a very market-oriented country in its expansion of solar power. He talked about how, for example, 9 out of 10 Chinese solar panel companies that were there in 2007 no longer exist, which he ascribed to market forces allowing a vigorous competition that has allowed only the fittest and most efficient to survive. Do you feel you are facing a market competitor in China as you try to survive here in the United States?
Yeah, I guess it's all the determination of how do you qualify or quantify, I guess, the criteria you determine in a market competitor. What I can tell you, though, is that the Chinese have provided benefits to a number of their local manufacturing companies. You can even look at some of the larger tier 1 suppliers today. They actually have a line item on their P&L which is referred to as subsidy income. What happened is that over time it became such a significant component of their overall operating income that their auditors at the time required them to break it out into a separate line item. If you look at the description of what that subsidy income is there for, the definition is it's just provided without any other form of obligations to hire people to make capital investment or to any contingency or obligation to repay it. So I think when you look at that on the surface, it's hard to say that they're a market-based economy and that they aren't providing benefits to their manufacturer entities that other countries would not provide to companies, and the benefits of which First Solar would not be available to. The interesting fact around China is there's around 2 million jobs that are solar related in China. About 1.4 million of them are manufacturing. Part of the problem is 1.4 million is manufacturing. So as much as there may be a central effort to try to control and to consolidate, the state-owned enterprises in their efforts to protect those jobs will generally undermine and take their own actions to support whatever is needed to make sure those jobs are maintained in their particular regions.
Okay. And then continuing on that, do you have what you would regard as equitable access to lending here in the United States as compared to solar companies in China? Mr. Lee was saying that in the past, maybe the People's Bank of China did encourage lending to solar panel companies, but he said this is not something they're trying to do now because they have concerns about whether they have overcapacity in solar. Do you think there's a level playing field on solar financing?
You know, it's hard to, if you look at the financial condition of most of our Chinese competitors, some of them are technically insolvent and they're still able to get access to capital. If you look at what's happened with a handful of them recently that have moved away from delisting from the US stock exchange or have chosen to go private and to relist in China, part of that reason for doing that is to get access to capital that other markets such as here in the US they would not have access to, whether it's on the lending side or on the equity side. We're a very fortunate company though, to step back from a First Solar standpoint in that we generate operating cash on an ongoing basis. We have almost $3 billion of cash on our balance sheet. I don't need access to capital markets, but for project lending when I need to do that, and I do that mainly in the international markets. So we're fortunate in the fact that we're not dependent upon that. But if I were to be dependent upon access to capital markets, assuming my financial condition was very similar to some of our Chinese competitors, it would be very challenging to get capital here in the U.S.
Okay, thank you. Coming back to you, Irene, Norway has just begun a national debate over whether or not to divest from oil and gas companies outside of Norway. Now, partly in the case of Norway, of course, that's just asset diversification because so much of the national income is coming from oil. It's not necessarily an environmental statement to do that diversification. But that makes me wonder if in looking at renewable energy projects, as the head of renewable energy for Statoil, whether you have a lower hurdle rate, whether you accept a lower rate of return maybe than other enterprises because you're assigning a diversification value to those non-oil investments. Are these entirely market-based, cost of capital-based decisions that you're making as you do your renewable energy projects, or are they to some extent just trying to diversify Norway away from its dependence on oil and gas?
I guess we used to be the national oil and gas company of Norway. We now consider ourselves as a full-fledged energy company, and we do invest in renewables for, I would argue, 3 reasons. One is that it is diversifying our portfolio, which I think is good for any company. But we also believe it's a great opportunity. Renewables are growing super quickly, and we have a lot of the skills that are needed to do that. But we also do think they give us financially interesting opportunities. But then again, I cannot sit and compare a solar project directly to an oil and gas project. Oil and gas projects have tremendous price risk, and they've got subsurface risk, they've got investment risk or capex risk, whereas none of that is hardly applicable for a wind project with a long-term PPA or a solar project. So you need to take into the risk-reward aspect of the different projects. But we're doing this as a business opportunity, clearly. I have a strong mandate, and my boss reminds me every day I'm supposed to build a profitable renewable business, but clearly not with the same kind of hurdle rates as we put on oil and gas projects because they're so much more risky.
Thank you. Coming back to you, Mark, one of the powerful curves, as it were, in the solar industry, the cost reduction curve is sometimes called Swanson's law, as a different version from Moore's law. 20% drops in price for every doubling of capacity.
Right.
Do you see that holding true in the coming years? Just as Tom Friedman talked this morning about there's constant speculation over whether we'll finally see a departure from Moore's law, there's constant speculation on Swanson's law. Are we running near the end of what has been just this impressive 90% drop in costs over the last in prices over the last 10 years, or are we nearing the end, or are we going to continue to see these steep drops, 20% drops for every doubling of capacity?
Yeah. First off, I'll comment on it, but I also want to say one other thing. I think the reality is that when you look at solar, or even if you look at wind, the economics of solar stand on its own in terms of the need to continue to drive costs down that drives pricing down further, PPA prices, to me isn't necessarily the constraint in this marketplace today, all right? Solar prices are very competitive and economic, and you're seeing a tremendous amount of demand associated with that. Now, as it relates to where can the technology continue to go, we're releasing a new product. We made a decision about a year ago. It will actually be in production starting in the middle of 2018. That product will be 40% lower than our existing product today. Our existing product today has a cost advantage and is entitlement to crystalline silicon. So our current product is already the lowest cost product in the market. Our new product will be 40% lower than that. So we still have room to go in our technology to drive our efficiency up, which will drive costs down even further. But when you look at it across the entire balance of plant, whether it's at the inverter level, which now you've seen central inverters and string inverters, or whether it's with structures and moving from fixed into tracker and driving the tracker costs down, all those components are continuing to show that there's further cost reduction that's in front of us, which could then create more of an S-curve phenomena that says there's even a greater acceleration in the demand profile of solar if we can continue to drive down the costs and then obviously be more competitive than where solar is already today around our PPA prices or energy prices. But I don't see that as the dependency in the market right now. The demand is economical on a standalone basis without subsidies or any other benefits. It's a matter, though, how competitive this technology be over the long run, and I think there's still more room to go.
Okay. Coming back to offshore wind, Norway has traditionally been very dependent on Vestas wind turbines from right across the water in Denmark. How competitive are Chinese very large turbines becoming? On the one hand, they have been cost leaders in the wind turbine market. On the other hand, there have been sometimes reliability issues, and the costs of repair, to say nothing of replacement of offshore turbines, are exorbitant. Do you see the Chinese becoming serious players in offshore wind turbines?
Well, I guess you got the Chinese companies, Goldwind. They're the fourth largest turbine developer in the world when it comes to onshore. We haven't really seen that company or any other Chinese company penetrating the offshore wind space as of yet. There's lots of talks about them being out there trying to prepare themselves, but the development is going so quickly. We've seen the turbines move from 4-ish megawatt to people now talking about 15 megawatt turbines in the course of 3 to 4 years. So, you really need to be on top of it to keep up. So I wouldn't mind them coming into the space because you said we've got Vestas and then we've got Siemens, but that's about it right now. We're looking for GE to step up their game, but a little bit more competition wouldn't hurt.
Okay. By the way, I'd like all of you to think of your questions, but we're not going to get to them just yet. Mark, I guess we've got a decision coming up by the Trump administration, Section 201, by the end of January, on whether or not to impose what could be 20 to 40% tariffs. Would that be enough to at least stabilize what is left of the U.S. solar panel manufacturing industry?
Yeah, so when you look at so let's just assume right now and today, in most regions of the U.S., you're seeing PPA prices around $30 or so, right? And that assumes a crystalline silicon module price somewhere in the low 30s, 30 cents, maybe 33 cents, somewhere in that range. The tariffs, when you start thinking about 20% on top of, say, a 30-cent ASP, it's around 6 cents. Well, 3 cents of module price equals about $1 of a PPA price. So if you're selling into the market today at $30 and you have a 20% tariff on the module, 3 cents is going to give you a 31, another 3 cents gives you a $32 PPA price. When you're talking about locking into a 30-year PPA fixed price, $33 type of $32, $33 PPA price, that's still very compelling for any utility or any large C&I customer. So I don't see it being dramatic to inflection point to the overall demand in the marketplace. The question will be, is it going to be sufficient for enabling and helping a U.S. manufacturing base? It depends on how China reacts, right? So if China is going to continue to subsidize and provide benefits to their solar industry, it's going to be very difficult for a crystalline silicon manufacturer here in the U.S. to be competitive. The unmet need of this industry, in my mind, is lack of differentiation, right? And if you don't have differentiation, then the only thing you can compete on is price. If the U.S. manufacturing base is going to be largely focused on crystalline silicon and trying to go head-to-head with the Chinese, it's going to be very difficult on their own kind of basis, their own playing field. Where we're able to be successful is we have a differentiated technology, right? So we have a CadTel thin film technology that has an energy advantage. So for every labeled watt, you'll get more energy in real world performance, and we have a cost advantage. So through that differentiation, it allows us to compete and be viable against other companies that maybe don't have the same constraints that we would as a US-based company. So what's going to have to happen for the US industry? And I'm hopeful that there will be a very robust, large manufacturing presence here in the US, and we still manufacture here in the US, and we're looking to expand manufacturing in the US. They're going to have to continue to focus on the innovation side, and they're going to have to focus on how to create differentiation around the technology that creates advantages that will enable them to be competitive against maybe less than level playing field than they would have otherwise. And there's new technologies that could evolve out there. I mean, there's other forms of thin film, there's perovskites, there's things that can happen. And I think where we can be a leader in this industry is through innovation, which hopefully then creates more manufacturing jobs.
Okay, thank you. I guess one more question for the two of you, and then I want to turn to the audience. But that is the extent to which solar will be a competitive, viable option for very poor countries and not just an additional technology alternative for the rich. I'll never forget, I guess it was a little less than 2 years ago, I went alone to northern Nigeria, into an area with a lot of Boko Haram attacks, with children suicide bombers being sent into the market, and there was still this big blast mark on the ground where they'd just set off a bomb and then attacked the survivors. And I asked the local emir, what do you really need in order to try to stabilize this situation? And his answer, and I'll never forget it because it surprised me at the time, was we need electricity. Because he said we cannot reopen even our basic garment factories here in northern Nigeria if we can't get back online. We lack the grid access. On the other hand, he said, at least as then, solar is still expensive. There are breakage concerns when you don't have reliable freight delivery into places like northern Nigeria. Is solar going to be really competitive in trying to finally bring electricity to some of these impoverished, turbulent areas, or is it going to be still really the rich man's energy source? Why don't you start, Irene?
No, I think solar PV is a godsend for poorer countries. I think not only is it cheap, but it's fast. So you can develop a solar park in the course of 6 months, whereas if you had to do it through a gas value chain, it would probably take 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Create jobs. And the problem though is that it's not always sunny. What do you do when the sun goes down? So you need to find solutions to handle that. But just getting solar out there during the day is going to improve the lives of tons of people.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of initiatives that we're doing in Africa right now. One is with a company called Power Hive that we have an equity investment in, and we're basically putting microgrids in villages across Kenya. And it's going very well, and it's helping provide basic capabilities, not just for lighting and cell phone charging, but it's creating an industry around it, in terms of carpentry and other things, giving them milling capability that they wouldn't have otherwise. And so hopefully that'll bring the economic standard up a little bit, that then will continue to be able to invest and thrive on itself. So we're doing that right now, and that's going well. We have a large project that we're doing with a French company called Neoen in Zambia. It'll be about a 50 megawatt project in Zambia that is part of a scaling solar initiative that's ongoing there, with a couple different multilaterals providing financing around that. That one took a while to get it off the ground and sort of get the T's and C's and the structure around that, because it was the initial program under the Scaling Solar Initiative, and that's starting to take off now, and we're seeing follow-ons not only in Zambia but in other parts of Africa. So, and it's very competitive, and we're talking power prices that aren't all that dissimilar from what we're able to see here in the U.S. And again, for fixed prices for long-term with no feedstock costs, it's very compelling in a number of parts of Africa. The infrastructure issue that you referenced is truly a challenge. I mean, getting solar panels into some of these remote locations, and breakage can be an issue. We're working on, especially with our new product Series 6 that we're launching, different ways for freight and how we would package it to ensure we can get it, to make it more robust and resilient, so we can get it into more challenging parts of the world.
Is thin film more robust than polycrystalline silicon?
Well, again, we're glass, so it depends. If you're glass crystalline silicon with no frame, and you're glass thin film with no frame, you're the same situation. Now, if you're glass with a frame, which our new Series 6 product will have a frame, it allows for different stacking of the modules and maybe a little bit more robust ability to transport without breakage.
Okay. Why don't I open it up now to our audience? Who would like to ask the first question? We have a question back here, please. May we have a microphone here for him, please?
I'm Peter Kelney with Near Term Energy Wave Solutions. Denmark and Scandinavia were leaders in the orbit, perhaps, of Edinburgh, Scotland, in the open wave energy area. With the collapse in the UK of that effort, I wondered whether it's continuing and particularly in reference to hybrid systems combining wave, solar, and wind in offshore platforms.
I guess I can try to answer that one. About a month ago, we opened the first floating wind park in the world. It's outside Scotland, and it's very, very windy and a lot of waves. And the most frequent question I get, why don't you combine it with a wave plant as well? I think that's very, very hard, and because the whole key about our turbine is that we don't want it to move, so we got an IP righted control system that. But if you want the waves, you have to move, so it's very difficult to combine the two. And the movement is the hard part. The wave plants are just way behind when it comes to commerciality today, because the wear and tear on the equipment is hard. So I wish, but I don't see it coming anytime soon.
Very practical answer.
Yeah.
With that, we have a question back over here on the side, please. Here, they're just bringing you a microphone. I apologize for the delay.
Mark, it appears that with the Suniva case that you as an American company have the most to gain if the tariff goes into place. So my question to you is, do you think your stock price reflects that advantage? And if not, why not?
So, well, first off, we're not a party to the case, so make sure everyone obviously knows that. Do we believe in the merits of the case, and that, do we believe in free and fair trade? We completely do. Do we believe that objectively looking at this industry, has there been injury? I think you can easily determine that based off what's happened in this industry over the last few years, especially with the oversupply that's happened in the industry. I'll go back to my statement I said before. The problem in the industry is lack of differentiation. In that situation, the only way you can create a competitive advantage is scale. And what's happened is everyone has chosen to go aggressively to build manufacturing capacity in the hope of capturing some amount of scale. The problem is that just compounds the problem and makes the competitive environment and liquidation of inventory even more aggressive and bringing ASPs down to artificially low levels. We made a decision about a year ago to move to a new product that, again, we believe is advantaged in many different ways. We have been fortunate that we've been able to contract that product even before the announcement of the Suniva case, which is only about 7-8 months ago, and we've been able to sell through our production for the next few years. Has there been a benefit from the announcement of the Suniva case? It has been. It's only, I would argue, though, be from a risk mitigation standpoint. There are a number of our customers who are looking to hedge the risk profile because of the uncertainty of not knowing what they don't know. So has that given us some opportunity in the marketplace? Surely it has. But we're a global company, and we sell into the vast majority of the regions of the world where there's a need for solar. But for China, we've struggled to try to get access to the Chinese market. We've made some progress this year, but even though we're a leading solar company, it's very difficult for us to be successful in China, but the vast majority of the markets outside of China we do sell into. So I think our investors look at us and they say, they're a leader of this industry. There's tremendous amount of growth that's going to happen over the next several years. The Suniva case and the impact that it may have is going to be short-term in duration. The real question is, if you want to make an investment, who do you invest in? You have to invest in the company that has the best balance sheet with the most differentiated technology and ability to grow, and I think that's what's reflected in our stock price.
Do you see any move in the longer term back towards local content requirements? China started off with a local content requirement for its first big utility scale solar project in Dunhuang out in Gansu province, and then retreated from having a local content requirement. Ontario then had one, and China then challenged it, saying you shouldn't have any local content requirement.
Yeah.
Do you see this industry going towards a series of separate markets with local content requirements or not?
I really don't. I mean, almost every the solar on its own has become very compelling on its own. Okay, so what's happened is that I'll even use Saudi as an example, right? So when Saudi just had their recently announced tender sub $20 type pricing, right? The Saudis were engaging with discussions around we want local manufacturing. what we told them is, look, you can have a trade-off. Do you want the best power price, or do you want local manufacturing and the creation of jobs? Because the two will not go hand in hand. If you want the best power price, then let us take advantage of what we do best, find the right regions of the world in which we manufacture, create scale, drive cost out, and then be your supplier and your partner. If you want us to local manufacture, it's not going to give you the best power price.
Okay. Thank you both, Mark, Irene. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.